Okay, fantastic. And here we are, starting to come in for our next session as a part of the Social Value Matters 2020 conference. So welcome to our next session. Good morning, good afternoon and good evening. I know we've got an international conference today and people joining from all over the world, and we're absolutely delighted to have you all with us, all of our attendees and all of our fantastic speakers. My name is Catherine Manning and I'm the Operations Manager for Social Value International and also for Social Value UK. I'm here just to introduce the session and for the logistics, so I'll be handing over to our moderator and panelists in just a moment. So today's session is on diversity and inclusion as a focus of financial markets, and Antoine is going to be our moderator, and so I'll be passing across to Antoine in just one second. Just two housekeeping points before I do. The session is being recorded and the recording will be posted up onto the Social Value Matters conference website as soon as possible, directly after the session. There's lots and lots of the other sessions on there that have already taken place that are available for catch up, and all of the ones coming up over the next 2 days will be made available as well. The second point is that we do have a chat function, so please do say hello in the chat to the other attendees and the panelists and put in any thoughts and comments throughout the session. And there's also the Q&A function there as well for any questions that you might have. So that's enough from me, and I'm delighted to hand across now for our session to start.
Well, thanks a lot, Catherine, and thanks a lot to all of you. We're really happy to be here today with you. So yes, we're going to focus on diversity and inclusion as a focus for financial markets. So the panelists today are going to introduce them really quickly. So Karen Ogen-Toews from the Wet'suwet'en First Nation and CEO of the First Nations LNG Alliance. Janet Annesley, Senior VP of Corporate Affairs and Human Resources at Husky. Faith Saghir, Head of Sustainable, Responsible and Impact Investing at Mackenzie Investment. And myself, Antoine Mindjimba, an Associate Partner at EY and the National Lead for our Culture and Diversity Inclusion service offering. So just maybe before starting and deep diving into the topic, I'd like to highlight today it's the Orange Shirt Day, and quickly I will explain why it's important to us and why I wanted to talk a little bit about it before heading into our topic. So Orange Shirt Day is an event created in 2013, designed to educate people and promote awareness in Canada about the Indian residential school system and the cultural and socio-economic impact it has had on Indigenous communities. So we're thinking it was important to mention it because you will see today we're going to really talk about what's the impact, what's the socio-economic impact of diversity inclusion, and what are the business imperative that diversity inclusion can address in the context of organization. So just wanted to pay tribute to Orange Shirt Day. All right, so just a few words on how we see diversity inclusion at EY before asking a few questions to our panelists. So in the context of COVID-19 and more social justice as we see what happened south of the border, we saw a shift in priorities and the need to focus on people more than ever to sustain value. I work a lot with clients that are looking to improve their culture and are really focusing on the inclusiveness culture trait of their culture, not only for societal reason, but also to address business imperative. And that's really what I'd like to discuss today. A few things that we've seen over the last few years. For instance, we do believe capital and talent will shift from organizations that only create value for their stakeholders to do stories that create value in the long term. So across a broader group of stakeholders, including employees, consumers, society, and shareholders. For instance, The Embankment Project for Inclusive Capitalism, called EPIC, and insights developed since 2018 have confirmed the need to be more people-centric for organization. In addition, we have seen the asks from clients and younger generation to really work for and buy from organization with strong purpose aligned with being more society-centric and more respectful of all key stakeholders. Recently, Japan's corporate governance code revisited its general principle to emphasize culture and ethics. State Street Global Advisor called on boards to get their company's culture right to deliver their strategy. And more recently, BlackRock CEO, Mr. Finks, sent a letter to all the CEOs he's working with to reinforce an increasing focus on purpose to improve long-term success. So it seems that diversity, inclusion, and culture at large is now a key strategic considerations for organization to not only perform better, but also to access funds and money. So that's really what I'd like to explore with our panelists today. So maybe just to get started, one first question to all of you. How do you, each of you, define D&I? Janet, do you want to start?
Sure, I'll start. We actually, put the I before the D, firstly. Diversity for us is really an outcome. And thinking about I and D and the ladder of engagement with employees and with stakeholders, we look to inclusiveness, we look to respect, we look to belonging, and finally to engagement and trust. And that's the kind of culture we aim to create inside of our company, so that it's documented well that cultures that are high trust have better performance, teams that have high trust have better performance. And we know just simply from counterparties, whether they're commercial counterparties or customers or communities or indigenous communities, having those trusting relationships is the way, long-term trusting relationships is the way that we can create value. So that, I hope that sums it up. That's how we're thinking about it.
No, thanks a lot, Janet. Karen, would you continue?
I'd like to say that in Canada, we have diversity of races and ethnic backgrounds, and diversity in the context of Indigenous people. Within Canada, we have 600 First Nations who are elected band councils. We have 7 different language families. We have urban, rural, and remote Indigenous people. And we are indeed diverse, even in non-Indigenous people, and non-Indigenous news media seem to figure that we all think alike. So I think diversity in mainstream society, that's one piece as coming from an Indigenous perspective. And then the piece about inclusion, I think from my perspective, it is about a sense of belonging according to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And especially when we think about it from an Indigenous point of view, belonging and inclusiveness is so strong because we believe in the collective of our families and communities and have that sense of belonging. Like when I say I'm Wet'suwet'en, I belong to the Wet'suwet'en nation. So there's always going to be a place to call home for me. No matter where I live in Canada, my home is the Wet'suwet'en territory. So I think I can't even explain the word in a true sense of what inclusion really means to me as an Indigenous woman and an Indigenous person. So I think that's huge. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Karen. Fate.
Yeah, I love the term belonging. I think that's really huge, and what Janet and Karen explained, it definitely resonates with me and resonates with our company. I think the other thing that we think about is if we're in essence corporations that are creating value for our clients, And if you as your leaders and your employees don't reflect the diversity of the clients that you serve, then you'd find it very challenging to have that empathy to create real value for them. So I think, you know, being reflective of the people that you serve and the clients that you serve is also, you know, another point that we look at.
Thanks a lot, Faith. Yes, yeah, and the question could be also, is belonging a byproduct of inclusiveness, or is it something that we need to focus on? Well, that's food for thought. So can you please each of you talk a little bit of what you're doing in your respective organizations? Maybe Faith, do you want to continue?
Yeah, sure. I can do that. So we take diversity very seriously, and I think, you know, a couple of years with and UC CEO Barry McInerney, gender diversity was a priority for him. He has 3 overachieving daughters and a very strong wife. That's incredible. So I think that was something he brought to our organization. But we focused on gender first, and I think most organizations focus on gender first because it's very easy to measure, right? And it's easy to implement. I think, you know, now in the last I'd say year, we've been trying to think about how do we broaden our focus and how do we start to collect the data on our own employees to determine, you know, how we help to improve our diversity metrics across the organization to better reflect the Canadians that we serve. More recently, we're a founding signatory. I think it's getting announced tomorrow with the Responsible Investment Association. They're releasing a diversity and inclusion investor statement whereby we will be mandating all of our portfolio managers to request for diversity disclosure from all of the companies that are within our mutual funds and ETFs to find, and once we get the data, we'll be able to correlate, because there's a lot of academic studies that, you know, link specifically, I think, again, because of the data, they focus on gender, but there's a lot of academic studies that link gender diversity to better performance and outcomes in organizations. So once we have the data, we'll be able to better integrate diversity metrics into all of our investments and attribute performance. And then last but not least, and I really believe in this, I think my colleagues probably get sick of me using the term authenticity, but I love that the statement also covers that. But we're not going to go out and ask companies in our portfolios to do this stuff if we're not doing it ourselves. So we're in the process of collecting on a voluntary basis right now, because that's how it is in Canada, but collecting the diversity profile of our employees so we can set targets and help to ensure that, again, we're reflective of our clients.
Well, thanks for that, Faith. I think it's really interesting what you just mentioned about the data-driven approach. And I do think that's what I'm seeing with clients is really moving from a loosely defined a statement to agreed on what culture and diversity means to something that is data-driven and it's linked to your business performance. So I do think that's what organization should go to. And as you were just mentioning about the investor statement, it's going to be really interesting to see what you're going to have access to in terms of data, and really quickly how you're going to be able to correlate what you see from an inclusiveness perspective with some actual business performance. So I'm really eager to see some of the results. But thanks a lot, Faith. Janet, do you want to continue on what you do within your organization?
Sure. Now, I've been with Husky for about 2.5 years, and there was a lot of progress that was certainly made before my arrival. And one of the things that I wanted to get a snapshot on, though, was exactly what Faith talked about, was the data. You know, I only see the people I see in my circles, so I'm trying to get a better lens on what our diversity truly is within the company. And it's been a challenge. You know, we're back out again with our employees, asking them to fill out the self-identification surveys. And I understand, you know, there's a lot of reasons why, you know, some people may not want to fill it out at all, and some people don't want to self-identify. But, you know, as we look at diversity and trying to get a line of sight to how well we're doing, that information is crucial. And as Faith says, you know, when investors may now come to Husky and actually ask us for that information, and that contributes to their investment decision making, then it just underscores, you know, the work that we have to do and how we have to think about the data challenge. The good news, I suppose, is that when we dug into the data, you know, there were some bright spots. There's certainly a lot of areas for additional work. But in terms of bright spots, one was around gender diversity at the senior levels within Husky. We found that the talent pipeline, in fact, is so robust that we set a gender target this year for senior leaders, and that 25% of our executive positions, level VP and above, will be held by women. And as we were setting that very specific target, it drove a lot of interesting conversations on among women and with men and others, you know, just about, you know, what a target means versus a quota. And, you know, whether a target is robust enough to be 25%, even though certainly our peer companies don't have targets of any percent. And, you know, whether we should set a timeline to get there, and what the message would be to the world about promotions of women in the context of a very strict target. But, you know, all of that set aside, I think that the number one message I heard from people is, and we look forward to setting more targets, because this message was so clear. It was, unless we see progress, we have to set targets. And that there's a huge amount of frustration in organizations, I think in society, as we've seen most recently, about the lack of progress evidence, and the evidence of that there's been progress made on diversity. So I think companies are getting a real call to action on how to show that they're moving this ahead.
Thanks a lot, Janet. And I really like the without progress, we need targets. I think it's extremely powerful. And what is interesting also is what we're saying more and more is maybe 5-10 years ago, minorities or women didn't want to be a token. And I'm not saying that we're willing to be now, but you know what? I mean, if I'm promoted because I'm good, and on top of that, being a woman and being promoted or being a minority that's fine with me. But 5-10 years ago, said, no, I'm not part of that. But that's really interesting. I really love. I'm going to steal that from you. Without progress, visible progress, we need targets. That's a nice slogan. Karen?
Hi. Well, I do 3 different roles right now. I'm the CEO for the First Nations LNG Alliance and co-founder of the Alliance. And then I'm also a council member for my nation, the Wet'suwet'en First Nation. And I just recently started an MBA with Simon Fraser University, and it's the Indigenous Business Leadership Program. So there's 36 of us students in that class that range from all across Canada. So there's quite a diversity within Indigenous people there, and we are really learning a lot from one another. So when I think about diversity and inclusion, it's something that I believe that I live and breathe every day. Being Indigenous, because there's such a diversity of our nations, our languages, there's quite unique distinctions that separate us, but also, you know, we form the whole, you know, Indigenous people of Canada. So, and then when I think about inclusion, depending on which context you're using it in, one example, the work that we do with the First Nations LNG Alliance, this organization has been started when I was the chief for my nation. And, you know, back in the 1950s, First Nations weren't given a say. They didn't have a seat at the table when it came to accommodation and consultation. And so it's like we've been fighting for that inclusion. And so, you know, that's something that, you know, that's what I do as my work, you know, with the province, with the federal government, with industry, is always making sure we have a seat at the table and making our space to belong. Because, you know, projects nowadays can't go through without, First Nations and Indigenous consultation and having a seat at the table. And, it goes a long way. And I can't say it enough that diversity and inclusion is a part of who I am in whatever workspace that I bring it into, whether it be the CEO or my council job or even my seat at the MBA table. That the whole sense of diversity and inclusion, it's something that we sort of live and breathe, not just in our organizations, but as women, as Indigenous people, as somebody that belongs to Canadian society. So I think it's for me, it's broad, and it's something that I bring into the work that I do.
Well, thanks a lot, Karen, and it's extremely powerful. Recently, I was working with a client, and he said something really interesting. He said, "We're not accommodating diversity; we're celebrating diversity." And I think what you just said, it's exactly aligned with that. And being fully conscious and aware and proud of what you're bringing to the table that is different by the very nature of who you are and your experience. And we're in some sense, I mean, we have more than 7 billion individuals with own stories. I think that's exactly what it is about, bringing diversity as a strength for the organization and a country. So let's move. And I realize what you said, Fade, about what you're currently doing, and I'd like to go back to that. But we talk a little bit about the challenges. So can we investigate a bit more? What are the key challenges that you're facing in your organization or in your industry, trying to be more inclusive or setting up some inclusiveness program or discipline? What are the key challenges that you're facing? Who wants to start? Faith?
Yeah, I think we've touched on this. The lack of data has been challenging. I think especially on the in Canada, where all this stuff gets reported on a voluntary basis, and I think our company's in the process of collecting data again on a voluntary basis. But from the couple of companies that I've been partners that we have, and companies that I collaborate with on various topics, they're having employees are hesitant to indicate or answer these surveys, and I think they're unsure of if does HR have a hidden agenda. So in some of our messaging, we'll be building things on the business impact of not having this data. So we in addition to serving the Canadian market, we also serve the US institutional market. We have a number of mandates there. And more recently, we received an RFP that required us to complete the diversity profile of our employees. And we were not able to do that. And as a result, we were eliminated from participating, or screened out from participating in that proposal. And so, we're starting in asking employees to provide us with this information. We need to show hey, there's business value in this, and here's what we're going to do with the information. It's confidential. It's at an aggregate level. But anyway, a whole slew of challenges, I think, on the data side. Maybe I'll stop and see if others have. I've got a couple other challenges, but I'll see what else others have to say.
Thanks a lot, Faith. Janet, do you want to continue on the key challenges that you're facing? It seems that data, that's really something that we've understood, and also maybe the lack of understanding of why diversity and why the data are really of business value. But what else are you facing, Janet?
Well, I think that, the data is a challenge. We have some RFPs that we respond to where we have to also fill in the data. And, I would say the key challenge, though, for us is when it comes to talent, that, we are recruiting quite heavily, despite the economic situation that we're all in. We continue to have job vacancies, and we continue to need, top talent to come into our organization in all different roles. Mm-hmm. And, we're not going to get the talent that we need. And I consider Husky to be an employer of choice, and I would not want any individual, especially I can think of, my personal experience as a woman. I do look in an organization and say, can I see women at the top? Can I see women in different roles? in the organization, or am I going to be, the only one? So, I think we have to, our number one challenge right now is ensuring that we have a culture and an environment that embraces and gets the best out of people. And that more than ever, young graduates are looking at companies like Husky and saying, I want to see some evidence that this is a place where I'm going to be able to be successful while being myself, and that it's an open culture. I'll be respected. People will invest in me, and my career will grow. So to me, that's, the talent side of inclusion and diversity is the biggest challenge, but it's also the biggest opportunity.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Janet. Yes, the war for talent is something that I'm hearing a lot from organizations I'm working with. And not only how do you attract talent, and we see that young generation that is way more demanding and it's good, but also to retain talent after a few years saying, hey, do I have a career within that organization?
Awesome point. Retention is key. It's not just, so you can't rest on any laurels. Every single day, you have to retain those key people, because that's where I think, perhaps have the biggest challenge, particularly when it comes with high potential women, is that they're mobile and they will leave your organization, and they do have options.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I'd like also to talk about, okay, so sorry, I'm all over the place. Karen, thanks a lot, Janet.
When I think about this and the challenges, I think about it from a broader context for Indigenous people. One of them, the challenges that I see is making our voice count, making sure that, like I said earlier, that getting a seat at the table. I'm seeing more and more, especially, I'm sure most of you have seen and heard the controversial blockades in BC over the Coastal GasLink pipeline. When we think about that, people need to see that as something that, in my view, taking the good out of that is, and creating value out of that, was that people started to learn about the history of Indigenous people across Canada and what unceded territories mean. And so in my view, that whole blockade issue was a spin-off to sort of teach people about the history of Canada, because for me growing up, that wasn't taught in grade schools or public schools or post-secondary. I had to go to post-secondary in the 90s to learn about the history of our people and what happened to us. So I think that's one, is creating that awareness and education for people about the history of Indigenous people across Canada, like the residential schools, the 60s Scoop, and really promoting the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and all of the recommendations. And one of the biggest pieces is the economic reconciliation. And so the other piece is about, I don't know if I'd see it as a challenge, but I in some ways it is, when I think about equity ownership. When people come to, or businesses or industry come to First Nations, we don't want to use a cookie cutter approach on how to engage with Indigenous people. I think for me, it's about what are you going to bring to the table for us that will benefit our people at the end of the day? And one of them is equity ownership, because we want to be able to stand on our own 2 feet. We want to be able to have clean drinking water. We want to have, basic human rights as Indigenous people. So that's what I think about when I think about it in a broader context, because I bring that into every role that I do, as whether it be the CEO or being a council member, or even, bringing up these discussions in our classes with SFU. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
No, thanks a lot, Karen. It's extremely powerful. Oh, please.
I think, sorry, maybe I just want to, and I'm glad that Karen is on this panel. I think, one of the things that we need to recognize, and I think in Canada, is we often look at what's happening in the US, and I hear this all the time, and people say, oh, that doesn't happen in Canada. right? I mean, it's very extreme what's happening in the US, right? Specifically, I guess, people of color and just, you know, I mean, thank God for social media to help amplify those stories. But I think in Canada, we don't have a recognition that systemic racism exists here. But in fact, it does exist here. And I think, you know, one of the things in educating Canadians on what version of systemic racism is here and how do we overcome it, like, I feel like it's almost like an intervention where we all need to agree that, yeah, it's here, right? It's not maybe in the same way as what we see in the US, but it doesn't mean that it's not. And I think we need that recognition as a country and as a people.
Well, thanks a lot, Faith, and thanks a lot, Karen. What I'm hearing is lack of awareness, and not lack. We can say lack of awareness, lack of education, not truly understanding what the various minorities, and we talk about the First Nations, are really experiencing. That's something that we see. And I've been lucky enough to, you know, used to live in Europe for many, many years and work in a lot of countries in North Africa and Europe and Eastern Europe. And it's funny as ignorance is maybe from a diversity inclusion perspective, is the main disease when people don't understand. And what is interesting, what happens south of the border is there is kind of an awakening. Oh, really? It happens? Well, yes, it happens. And we've been saying that for years. So I think that's the power of the moment. Even if people are dying, it's horrible, but that's the power of a moment. And yes, if we have a voice and if finally we're heard, and they say we, all minorities, whatever they are, I think it's great. So thanks a lot for sharing that, Faith. Thanks a lot, Karen. So maybe Faith, you wanted to add something about on the key challenges?
No, that was another one that I wanted to add, just like relative to the US, but yeah, thanks. Okay,
thanks a lot. So maybe I'd like to talk a little bit about the role of the shareholders in driving the conversation, because what is interesting is we see some pressure from investors to the organization. And what you said, just going back to my notes, that you just finished developing an industry-wide D&I statement with the Responsible Investment Association. And what I said in my opening statement around what State Street and BlackRock CEOs were saying and were pushing to their CEOs. So what can you say about, and why is it happening first? And what are the key challenges you're seeing that your organization, these CEOs you're working with, are facing based on that need that is driven from the investors?
Yeah, maybe I know Janet and I kind of sit on different sides of this because she's on the investee side, right? But we still get exposed to that as well, right? Because we have we're also you know, in portfolios as a company. And have analysts and shareholders. And I really think the focus on D&I, you know, during this pandemic, I think it did stem from the systemic racism and the challenges that have been faced in the US. It's really helped to amplify that, right? I mean, we've already, I think, you know, I think climate, when we think about responsible investing, climate's still at the forefront, but this pandemic and the challenges in the US just helped to, you know, put social causes on the same platform as climate. And so what that means is now, you know, we're all trying to determine if we want to ensure that we're providing responsible investments back into the market and that we're really, you know, helping to meet the needs of all our stakeholders. What does that look like? And so you'll see what BlackRock, State Street, and even what the RIA D&I statement's asking for is more disclosure, right? We can't track, we can't put metrics around this, you know, unless we have the data, and that's the essence of that statement. And I think it addresses some of, like, much of what it's asking for is some of the challenges that we've already talked about. But I think Janet probably has the other side of that story, being more on the investee side.
Please, Janet.
Thanks. And, you know, I personally, being on the investee side, I welcome the attention from investors on climate, the different frameworks that have come out, to provide companies with a path forward on how to think about particularly about climate-related risk, and how to then ensure that we are doing what we need to do to manage that risk internally. And as more investors look at diversity, we look forward to having the same deep conversations and having the same thoughtful types of frameworks to understand how can we get better at managing diversity as a risk, because again, it is people are and their kind of human capital is a big area and a big part of a company's value, and ensuring that human capital and that talent going forward is a huge part of that company's capital value. And if diversity from the management science shows that I don't think you could begin to even measure how many companies groupthink has destroyed, and the need to have that kind of diversity at the table in different ways. So I think the investor attention is nothing but constructive for an industry like ours, because what gets measured gets done, and the CFOs and the CEOs really care what the street thinks. So, this is an ongoing conversation. And I think the companies in Canada have pretty good performance in this area. Yes, we have to do much better, but we've got pretty good performance in this area. So I think the investor attention, we need to structure it, we need to deepen it, but it is welcomed.
Mm-hmm. No, that's very interesting. Thanks a lot, Janet. And I think what is interesting is not only, if I may say, it's not about compliance, but it's really complying with the requirement from the investors. It's not only a burden, it's something that is actually helping you be better, not only on paper, but actually from a business and a business performance perspective. That's really interesting to hear. Karen, I'd like also to ask you, so you when we were, prepping for that session, you talk about group thinking and how diversity inclusion could address or counteract the idea of group thinking. So what do you see the opportunities that or the ability of diversity and inclusion to reduce risks? So you talk about socioeconomic advancement, or you talk also about the fact that you're coming to the table with being diverse, being truly diverse, and you're seeing what you can bring to the table in, for instance, what you're doing with the various organization or your MBA. So what else do you see that diversity inclusion can bring to the table?
Well, I was going to talk a bit about the question about the shareholders and investors. From a different context, we're on the other side of the table. And I think I brought up in our discussion about how I was sitting on a panel with different First Nations that I see more as experts on the UN Declaration. And one of the fellows that was from industry just said, well, investors see all of these blockades and then they want to walk away. And I thought, well, you know what? I think this is an opportunity to educate and make aware of Indigenous people and why there's blockades and why they do what they do. There's been court cases that sort of spell out how many court cases that have been won by First Nations people. So again, it's making people more aware about what's on the other side. And I say that because one of my professors in my undergrad, he'd always tell me, he says, if you believe in something so strongly, then argue the other side. So always look at the other perspective. And so that's sort of, how I view things. And people think, oh, well, she's, it is about viewing the other side and seeing what's there for us. So I think in that context. And the other piece, I was just watching a TEDx video for our class, and the way this fellow brought brought this to light, and I thought it was quite interesting because, you know, in mainstream society, we view organizations and businesses and CEOs getting, you know, top dollar. But in this context, this fellow had taken a yogurt company and built it, and it's quite a well-renowned yogurt company, where he talked about making your employees the shareholders, not just the CEO getting top dollar, and you know, showing investors that this is how we do business. It's about, you know, building up our employees, making them a part of the decision making, and being owners of these companies. That way we're sharing the wealth, and that made so much sense for me. And you know, especially during this pandemic, we're going to have to really be creative and innovative on how we're going to embrace diversity and really push that point home of inclusivity. And how are we going to do that on the ground, given the pandemic and, you know, having to do conferences by Zoom? You know, we have to be really thinking about how we want to do our work on the ground, because this may be our new normal for a while. So it really makes us think about how we want to do our jobs and do it more effectively.
No, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Karen. And I think it's a good transition to really thinking about tomorrow. So yes, the pandemic is putting a lot of burden on organization and on their culture and how they're going to be able to maintain. So it could be seen, even if it's not a good word to use, opportunity, because people are actually dying, but it might be also an opportunity to rethink what organizations should be tomorrow. So in one of my, initial statement, I was saying, well, it's a way to rethink and be more people-centric. So within your organization, and how do you see the change? Because it is true that we don't know how long it will stay. And I was listening to a CNN podcast last night, and it was interesting to see that, well, actually, we might never go back to what was life 2 years ago or six months ago. It's going to be different. So there is a huge impact on our organization. So how do you see the pandemic and the social crisis we're going through as being an opportunity to rethink and what that new normal should be? Could be. Who wants to start?
I can go first, because we spent 2 days on this, about 2 months ago, just with our executive team, just trying to think about what the post-pandemic life will be like. I think I do think it's going to be more inclusive. To be honest, I see that already, in how we engage over video conference. So 6 months ago, when we've got locations, as many of you that are global, and so 6 months ago, the folks that were sitting in Toronto around the boardroom, and if you had folks scattered across across the country or even the globe, the folks in Toronto would be having one conversation, and we'd often forget about who was on video conference, right? And now it's kind of what's nice about this platform. Well, I think many of us, I can't wait to get back out and at least put on something more than jeans for a day. But I think it's great because you have everybody's attention. We at our organization are camera always on, unless you're having lunch and you're doing a lunch camera. But it really is providing a more inclusive platform so that no one gets left out and everybody's ideas are being shared, which is really great. So I think that's one thing. The other thing's just around more flexible work hours, right? And so, we have employees that, if they have to go do something with the kids throughout the day or pick up groceries or whatever, this work arrangement gives you flexibility for that. And, people are still putting in probably more than the hours that they were before. But those are a couple of things that we're thinking about.
Thanks a lot, Faith. Janet, do you want to go next?
Yeah, it's a big question. So got a lot of thoughts on it. It's been an interesting journey because the pandemic and the immediate need to work from home and that transition to the home environment presented some challenges. And I think, you know, Fate touches upon some of the opportunities. I think the technology has really worked well. It's given us a new way of working. You know, someone said, you know, were you on your podcast, or were you watching the presidential debate last night at all? Because, you know, if that was over Zoom, the moderator could have just silenced, you know, certain people at certain times, and it would have actually probably had a better, you know, result for the viewing audience. So the technology can be good, and I know from chairing meetings, I notice more who's not speaking when it's done over Zoom. And there's other technology on Teams. We're beginning to unlock features where, you know, people can rate how the meeting experience was and the value of the meeting, and that's really helping. But what we were also very conscious of was the need to make sure that people were checking in with their teams. That, you know, I do work in a dominantly technical type of company with a lot of, you know, don't want to prejudge, but there's a lot of engineers that tend to be more comfortable in an introverted kind of mode. So getting people, especially individual contributors, to make sure that they were having contact with their team leads, that they were contacting their colleagues, virtual coffees, these things. And the good news, what was reported back, was actually people, for the first time, I feel, in about 5 years, were truly asking their colleagues, how are you? How are you doing? You know, what's this like for you? And we're understanding these things. Seeing into people's homes is kind of cool too. It's sort of, well, what's that piece of art back there? Is that your dog, or is that your child? So that learning was good. But I would also say that we were very cognizant, and we continue to be, about any kind of divide we could also be creating between our operational employees, of which we have thousands in the field, who can't work from home. And, you know, recently it was brought up, of course, vacations. If I were to choose to go to Las Vegas for a weekend, I could return and quarantine in my house and work from home for 2 weeks. You know, that's feasible. But my colleagues out in the field, they can't do that. And so we don't want to create a first class and a second class and so forth kind of employee system based on, you know, what kind of benefits or privileges people have in the pandemic. So that's driven a lot of very good conversations around here. And again, you know, what is our attitude towards the other members of the economy? We have a retail business with thousands of retail sites across Canada. You know, how do we feel the economy can reopen safely? And what is our role as a business leader in driving that? So it's been an excellent conversation, but it's certainly not over yet, and it's got a lot of different dimensions.
Thanks a lot, Janet. And just before handing it over to Karen, I think what is really interesting in what you're saying is there's a lot of good things, more integration, what you said, Fate, more flexibility, more checking ins, more intimate conversation, because it's a must do, it's a must have. We don't have all the solutions and all the answers, but what is interesting is it's kind of a new mindset where you have to be deliberate in connecting with your organization, employees, staff, colleague, peers, because it won't happen if you don't do it. And I'm really optimistic because now our organization are more people-centric than they were in the past. They don't have all the solutions, but because they're asking the questions, that's already a step towards a solution. Sorry. Well, thanks a lot, Janet. Karen, just to go back to the questions, and I lost my train of thoughts around yes, opportunities. Was it? I lost my train of thought. What was the question? Jesus.
Is around what's going to change.
What's going to change? Here it is. Thanks a lot, Fate. I was so into what Janet just said. Oh gosh, okay, who am I? Thanks a lot, Fate. What's going to change, Karen?
Well, I think it was about to rethink about organizations for tomorrow and post-pandemic. Well, I think about this in a couple of contexts, one as an individual and one as a collective. And, you know, just sort of talking about since March up until now, a lot of people have been working from home. And that was what I've been doing for the last 4 or 5 years. And, you know, that sense of isolation. And I think that more people, I'm assuming that the pros to that was probably less stress because having to drive to work or to travel, because a lot of my work before pre-pandemic was traveling, and I was stressed out. And so now we're I've never done so many Zoom calls, WebEx calls, team meetings, learning all these different platforms. And like Janet said, we're seeing people their authentic selves, like dogs barking, kids in the background, and just seeing that how things are shifting, because we are real people, and who we are and our roles and titles are sort of enmeshed with that. This is who we are, and this is what I do. And so that on that individual level, that's what I see. And I don't know if that's going to change, but I think we're seeing more people being their authentic selves on camera, and being the same person off camera. So, and then the other piece about the collective from my perspective, and we just finished doing a big group project for our MBA on this, about the digital divide. Pre-pandemic, Indigenous people already had that disconnection. Northern and remote communities all over Canada have had that whole digital divide going on before the pandemic. And now it's even more so, like low bandwidth, not being able to connect. One of the things we do in our community is we try to have community member meetings every month or quarterly, to sort of let them know this is what we're doing and we need your input on this. Well, we can't even have Zoom calls within our community because they have little to no internet connection. And it's become a real issue. And already, Indigenous people already have had disadvantages, and this pandemic has compounded them. And so I think, on a collective level, it's really something that we're being more aware of, being more cognizant of how this pandemic has affected every single one of us in our lives, in our business, and that whole notion of isolation. So I think it's rethinking how we're going to do business, how we want to get our message across as a collective, and in whatever organization we work in. So it's, I was camera shy, and I'm now having to just bite the bullet and put my camera on and let's do this. So yeah, so it's created quite a shift, and it's a good shift.
No, thanks a lot. And I think the digital divide, that's really what, Janet, you mentioned also, ability to work from home. So from corporate to field, I mean, that's the digital divide, or from one community to the other one. And that's what we're hearing and seeing across the globe. I have family in France, and that's exactly what's happening. We see community that not necessarily have access to a good internet connection. Kids are really they are behind when it's time to go back to school, because the versus summer or the last 3 months of school, they didn't have the opportunity to have access to virtual classrooms. So yes, absolutely, that's something that we absolutely have to consider. But the good thing is we're actually seeing it now, and maybe that's something that we didn't see a few months ago. So I think we're close to the hour. So any key messages that you would like to leave our audience with before just wrapping it up?
I think I was going to comment on, both like Karen and Janet's perspectives on, this transition out of COVID and what post-COVID will look like. It's really like, I think this panel is really the power of diversity. I mean, yes, we're all 3 women. We've got a strong male moderator, but like, we're all women, but we all have very different perspectives, right? And I came at your question from very much a career-oriented lens of like, yeah, it's great. Like, I love seeing my colleagues, everybody gets included. Janet had a different like field to in office kind of, employee challenge that they're facing. And Karen, like, I didn't even, touch on like, or think about that digital divide of, the number of Canadians that don't have access to, good internet or even, computer. Like, this is the power of diversity, essentially, is ensuring that you do have a holistic conversation, and you're taking all of your stakeholders and community members into consideration, because one of us won't have all of the answers, right, and on our own. So thanks for the opportunity. That was great.
Thanks a lot, Faith. That was extremely powerful. Janet?
I likewise appreciate this panel. I think it was great to meet Karen. I've seen her a lot on LinkedIn, so I just am in awe that I'm on the same panel with her. And Mackenzie is, we've talked to Mackenzie and presented them to several times on our IR strategy. So it's wonderful to know what they're looking for more on the broader topics of ESG. As we go forward, I'm personally invigorated by the attention that I&D is now receiving. These are challenging topics, and I think the panel here today has dealt with a number of them, but we barely also really touched the surface. And we need to keep at this. A question came up on the chat there about do we need to get data, and would we kind of think about a regulatory means to get data? And yes, I think that's sort of what's next. And how do we deepen the conversation, and how do we ensure we have quality forums like this one to have these conversations? And we need to work through it. I think Karen is a champion and a trailblazer of having and a role model for her community and for a lot of women in Canada. And how do we expose more people to the diversity, the rich diversity in our country? Because we're going to get so much from the next generation if we can actually show them that the ground has been softened. Maybe the glass ceiling for different groups hasn't been broken yet, but the ground has been softened. But it's not going to be easy, and we have to be forgiving, and we have to be focused on things like the orange shirt, on healing, because we can't just cancel out views that we don't like. We need to understand them and embrace and engage in this conversation together.
Thanks a lot, Janet. It's extremely powerful. I'm so happy to be with you. Karen?
Well, I just want to thank all of you because every day I learn something new, either about myself or about some of these panels that we speak on. And, when I think about diversity and inclusion, embracing diversity, even within Indigenous cultures and Canada, and embracing diversity within Canada with the different races and ethnic backgrounds that we have, and even the roles that we do, there's such diversity, and either we can resist it or embrace it. And it just is easier, less stressful just to embrace it and accept people where they're at. And that whole notion of inclusion, I think that's really important, because when you think about it, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that sense of belonging, I don't know what it would be like for me as a Wet'suwet'en not to feel like I belong with our people. It's just something that's innate, that's built within each one of us, where we come from, who we are, what makes up who we are. So I think that whole notion of diversity and inclusion, this discussion could take place at different levels, different contexts, and continue to bring our messages home about what diversity and inclusion really means to each one of us, and in which context. So Misai, for having me on the panel. I really enjoyed it and being able to speak my truth. So Misai.
Thanks a lot, Karen. And maybe Catherine, before handing it over to you, and maybe we have some questions, I'm just going to wrap up a little bit what we said. It's going to be very difficult because so much. I think I'm going to start with what Karen just said. I think belonging, we don't know exactly if it's a byproduct of diversity and inclusion or if the ultimate goal, but belonging is something that will help individuals really thrive within our organization or country when they do feel they can be truly who they are. Diversity of thoughts, that's something that has been said for the last 60 minutes. From a business perspective, being able to bring various perspectives and broadening our ability to view the world or view some challenges, that's something that from a business perspective is extremely valuable. Some key challenges. First, it will take time. So thinking that organization can fix it overnight with an HR program, Well, actually, it has to be embedded into who you are as an organization. And one means to be able to do that is to have access to data and move from a loosely defined view of what diversity inclusion is to having a data-driven approach that will help exactly link, correlate diversity, inclusion, and belonging to business imperative, being able to measure and being able to improve. So something that all of us, we said. From a business imperative perspective, war for talent, and I think that's what I'm hearing across industries. We cannot have access to the right individuals. We cannot fulfill all the positions that we have. That's something that we're hearing. So ability to have access to the right talents that are there, but we don't have access to them because we don't know exactly how we can reach out. That's something also from a business perspective that is absolutely critical. What you said, Karen, I think was extremely powerful, being deliberate. Don't expect that with one or two unconscious biases a session, everything going to be fixed, but it's a long-term program where you're going to embed and attack systemic challenges or issues that you have within your organization and within our society. Awareness, lack of awareness, being able to really educate people on what it means to be whatever you are. It's critical because most of the time what we've seen is lack of understanding. Ignorance is really what is impeding the ability of our organization to be more inclusive. The fact that investors are driving the agenda, the diversity and inclusion agenda, seems to be something positive. It's not only about being compliant; it's about helping organization understand what they have to do to improve their business performance. So something that was really interesting. And finally. I would say two things. Because we're now asking the right question and we're more people-centric, we do see some specific challenges, one of them being the digital divide. And that's something, we don't have all the answers, but we do see now the fact that some communities or some individuals don't have access to that digital capabilities, these digital capabilities that are something that is really negatively impacting in the context of COVID, knowing that COVID is not going to be the new normal, but the new normal won't be the one that we were used to until 6 months ago. So thanks a lot, Faith. Thanks a lot, Janet. Thanks a lot, Karen. It was extremely powerful. Catherine, I will head it over to you. Do we have any questions?
We're at the end of the time for the session, so I'm sure that there would be lots of questions that people would love to be able to ask, but I am going to have to put a pause onto the conversation here and say a huge thank you to you all for sharing all of your thoughts, your insights, and all of these amazing experiences, and also some excellent provocations for me, for the other attendees, and for everybody who's going to be listening and watching in the catch up on the conference sessions. Yeah, I've been frantically taking notes here to be able to take that back and sort of embed into the SVI network and the SVUK one. But I'd just like to say from Social Value International, a huge thank you to you all for sharing your experiences and for this wonderful discussion. For yourselves and for everybody else here, we are heading into now the wrap up of this day 3 of the conference and the wrap up of the leadership conversations that we've been having over these 3 days. So I'd love to invite you to come and join and hear about the actions that Social Value International and the wider network are calling out to ourselves and to the wider network for us to be taking forwards from these conversations. So that's just the final comment and share. Thanks you very much for joining and for all of these.
Thanks all of you. Thanks a lot. Talk to you soon. Thanks. Bye-bye. Bye. Take care. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.